Hi there. My name is Oliver Barraza. I am a middle school teacher, specifically seventh grade for English Language Arts. Today I'm going to be talking about what a mandatory report is, who all is involved in a mandatory report, what we do when we fill one out, and typically what happens afterwards as well. In a mandatory report, it is a process that is legally mandated by our state. That if we think a child might be experiencing any kind of neglect, abuse, or anything where the child might be in immediate harm, we report it, and it is usually followed up by law enforcement or by DCS, or as most people frequently know it, like CPS. Okay. Um, I understand that this topic is one of those that is incredibly delicate. So please understand that as I'm going through this, that my bluntness is purely for informational rather than about the situation itself. Okay. Once again, mandatory report is something that we are legally obligated to fill out if we think that any of those situations might be the case. Okay. When it tends to when I personally have run into situations where I've had to fill out a mandatory report, one of the very first things that I do is I go to our administration and to our counselors, say, "Hey, this is happening with this child. Should that be a mandatory report?" And if they say yes, then I follow through with the follow up steps that usually include our on site law enforcement, our officer on staff. Okay. Um, I also wanted to share while I'm talking about the process of what I do on my end. So I find out this information. It needs to be reported, right? But I also wanted to share what it is that our district uses. So within our district, we have a hub where we have a lot of our information and different things that we can use, and in here is easily accessible as a mandatory report. A mandatory report needs to be filled out like within 15 to 30 minutes of getting that information from the student that we think that they might be in danger. So it's important for us to have access to that at all times. Okay. This is the form itself. The form talks about who's following up. It talks about what like all the information from the student, who the report was made to, and all of the information that you got from the student. I believe it's really important to note we don't have to be 100% sure that a case is happening that requires a mandatory report. It's reasonable suspicion, right? So even if we suspect that there's something going on that really needs to be done, like we don't have to be 100% sure. We need to make sure that that child is safe is the main point. So um, like I've said, I personally have filled these out a couple different times just within the school year. And it's never a pleasant situation when we do, but it is something that happens, and it's important to note that when we do these kinds of things, the main purpose is to keep the child safe. Okay. Um, when a report is made, typically afterwards, um, it can be kind of a scary time for students and for families. If this ever happens in your life, what you should know is that after I file the report and the law enforcement or DCS has it, typically what will happen afterwards is depending on the nature of the report, the family is going to probably hear from the law enforcement or from CPS. An interview of a lot of the adults in the child's life will commence. That involves parents. It might involve other guardians, other adults or siblings in the households. And teachers will be interviewed as well, and anybody else that might be able to provide information on the student's well being. After that interview has taken place, depending on what information they find, the case might be thrown out, or it might be one of those that they will act upon it to figure out what is best for that child. In all situations, they try to keep families together as much as possible. But in case scenarios, sometimes action has to be taken in order to take care of that child. Um, with my personal experience that I have had with making mandatory reports, um, people have been incredibly respectful and incredibly professional, whether dealing with it on the end of me as an educator coming forward to raise a concern, or just from like talking with the families or with the student afterwards. Everybody has always been incredibly professional, incredibly thorough, and I don't think that anybody deserves anything less, you know? Um, uh, Also, personally, one thing that I do is if I am making a report, I try my best to make sure that if the student knows that the report is being made in whatever manner, like let's say they told me a thing and I'm like, hey, hang on there a second. I need an adult to watch you for a second because I do need to fill this out as a mandatory report. I go through and I explain to them what that means and make sure that they are fully aware on what their rights are and what's going to be happening, so that that way they're not taken off guard by this information. It doesn't necessarily mean that the student's happy about it. Sometimes they thought, oh, I was just telling Mr. Barraza like um, about this really traumatic thing, and I thought he was going to be cool about it, not tell anybody. But as a mandatory reporter, we do have to tell people, right? So again, it's all about student safety. So it's all about legal responsibility and making sure that they are safe. So that is all of what is involved in a mandatory report.